It is an online story that has become old hat, but when the new millennium finally arrived, many people felt that they were promised something. With this big transition would finally come a change in innovation and thinking that would increase quality of life in ways that were inconceivable. It was finally the future. This attitude would mostly be channeled through new mainstream domains such as the internet, and in 2001, this collective optimism continued to inspire hope for online users to bring positive change. Until it didn't. It did not take long for the World Wide Web's ambitious vision to quickly start to go belly up. A massive economic crash caused by overinvesting in online spaces, a new set of guardrails and sanctions on file sharing, and real-life geopolitical conflict helped make 2001 a rather tumultuous year for the internet, at least compared to how it was before. Now, groundbreaking innovation did still continue, particularly in how we gathered and shared information, but there was much more uncertainty about where the world online was headed next. Today, we will be looking at the internet in 2001.
You know, personal computers are getting better each year, faster than we can even keep up with, which is why I am here to teach you all about the art of cyber defense. This is in partnership with TryHackMe, the world's largest hands-on cybersecurity training platform. Learning just through lectures and books is boring, but TryHackMe lets you directly hack into real machines alongside 8 million other users worldwide. You know, AI slop is just being constantly shoved in our faces these days. How do I make chocolate chip cookies? How do I change a tire? How do I get rid of that restraining order? Use my head and common sense? No, sir. I've got a language model. But did you know that a lot of these language models are unreliable, not just at giving information, but also with securing information? A lot of companies are shoehorning AI tools that are very janky and can be easily manipulated, exploited, and even poisoned by hackers. Well, there is a room on TryHackMe that helps you detect the warning signs of these AI tools and how to defend yourself against them. I reserve the very best of my equipment for such occasions. My Gateway PC running Windows 98. Here we have a fictional AI calendar assistant, and your job is to find any vulnerabilities. Now you can't just ask, what's the CEO's email? It'll refuse. You have to outsmart it. Just like people, you have to manipulate them and lie to them to get what you want. First, I can try distracting it with a new conversation, such as, what are my meetings for next week? And then I'll try asking what it can't show me. And then next well, that was easier than I expected. There you have it. If a human was behind this, it would have been much more secure. But AI can't give you a restraining order. You can access TryHackMe yourself right now. It is all browser-based, and anyone at any skill level can get started, and even complete certification prep content. If you use my code at checkout or my link on the screen, you can get 25% off your annual subscription. TryHackMe. Know what you're signing up for.
In 2001, the internet essentially entered a reconstruction era. This was both due to an overall desire to make it something more sustainable and long-term, and also due to some turbulent events that occurred in the first half of the year. You're going to see a lot of overlap from online events that transpired in the year 2000, and that's no surprise. Many of these changes were long-term, and other things often lengthened their effect and even led to permanent changes that all occurred in 2001. This was when people realized that the internet was here to stay, but they had got it all wrong, and big changes needed to be made technologically and socially to have it reach its full potential. It is only in March of that year where the United States officially enters a recession, primarily driven by the burst of the dot-com bubble almost exactly 1 year before. Because of course, even with something big like a bursting economic bubble, these things do take time to unravel. I've already done an entire video on the dot-com bubble in detail, but the long and short is that investors were putting way too much money into virtually any online company that popped up, or colloquially, anything with a .com. While a lot of these websites became huge and had genius business models, a lot of them were completely pointless. Eventually, this overevaluation caught up with them, and they either went under or had a bunch of investors pull out, which then caused people to panic sell, and suddenly those who held onto it were now holding worthless shares, with trillions of dollars now lost. This meant people now had less money, therefore they couldn't spend as much, and so businesses were not as profitable. This creates a domino effect over time, and eventually leads to a recession. People were now realizing that the way they were using the internet had to change and be more practical rather than just throwing money at something because it's cool or silly. It needed to actually provide value. And a lot of these websites just didn't. To add insult to injury, it then seemed like the few that were valuable were also starting to meet their end. Just a couple months after the start of this recession, you have the shutdown of Napster. Now, I already talked about Napster in my Internet in 2000 video, but this time I want to talk more about its technology and how it changed file sharing and even information sharing in 2001. This was arguably one of the most beloved computer programs at the time, and it was a technological breakthrough in file sharing, making it faster and easier than ever before. The main problem it faced, however, was that this file sharing was not legal. Napster had this incredible peer-to-peer sharing system that removed the middleman and having to rely on expensive centralized servers to move things around, but they were pretty much only using it for copyrighted content, particularly songs, because they were just the right file size for 90s bandwidth. Now, for the average person, this is awesome. Who cares? But for the big record labels, even individual artists, they wanted to fight this. When the popularity of Napster really started to get out of control by 2000, a huge number of record companies and artists went in and sued the company. This legal battle would become a huge national news story and eventually lead to its complete dissolution and new copyright precedent. This was bad for a lot of people for a number of reasons. The obvious one, no more free songs, but a big part of it was also the implication behind this ruling. Now, by 2001, the real world was quite intertwined with the internet, but the internet was still a relatively lawless place. When you wanted to escape the rules and expectations of the real world, you went online, but now they were dictating terms there as well. Copyright law on the internet did exist prior, but nothing this tangible and strict. People had to completely rethink how files and information would be shared. Apple came up with a brilliant compromise for the legal problem behind Napster, getting digital individual downloads of songs quick and easy. They created iTunes, which allowed people to purchase MP3s of each song for just 99 cents. Was it as hands-on and free as Napster? No, but for the masses, it was still miles better than buying an entire CD at the store. iTunes' popularity would only explode with the release of the iPod, moving from primarily being a CD burner to being the song hub for your MP3 player. But what about for the people who still wanted to download and share copyrighted material? They didn't go away, they just had to get more clever. The peer-to-peer technology that Napster popularized was incredible and much more secure than nearly anything before it, but it needed to be improved. Napster was able to dodge a shutdown for so long because rather than hosting all the files in one centralized server, you instead downloaded the files from the computers of other Napster users. So if one user had their connection shut down, Napster could just refer you to another user, making it a game of cat and mouse. However, Napster's index server, the one which allowed you to actually discover the files, was indeed centralized and in one place. Once legal entities got that shut down, it was game over. What if you could also make the indexers decentralized per user as well? Just the year prior, a new protocol was developed called GNU-Tela, which effectively did exactly this. With the fall of Napster, another file-sharing service called LimeWire would take over. Although it started in 2000, it would really start to shine in 2001, and it didn't just share music, but a wide variety of file types. The GNU Tele concept would be further refined with something called Fast Track, which was effectively the same thing, but prioritized users with powerful computers and good internet connections as supernodes, who would help with most of the indexing. This significantly helped with traffic congestion. It is also in 2001 where another file-sharing service called Kazaa emerges, which used this fast-track protocol and effectively acted as Napster's replacement. Now, their decentralized setups gave them a huge buffer to continue existing, but they were still legal company entities. So, when these companies were court-ordered to shut their services down, they also eventually met the same fate as Napster. Other protocols entered the picture in 2001 as well, particularly when it came to handling large, complex files. As hard drive space got bigger and broadband internet grew and gave people higher bandwidth, demand for downloading big files increased. That same year, BitTorrent is released, allowing you to download a file in bits and pieces from multiple users at once, allowing for more reliable downloading and less chance of network failure. Rather than torrent websites hosting the files themselves, they would have something called a magnet link, which simply pointed to other parts of the internet which had that file, leaving them off the hook. So while Napster's shutdown did shake the internet quite a bit, new and much better replacements quickly came in and took things even further. While file sharing was becoming more decentralized in 2001, the sharing of information was becoming more centralized. Now, the top websites in the world at that time, like AOL, Yahoo, and MSN, all had their own website indexes organized by category, so superficially, it was easy to find your way around. But if you wanted to find something very niche, you had to rely on a search engine, which would then take you to whatever website had that information. This ranged from heavily moderated and updated websites to unverifiable, even completely abandoned blogs. Doing research was often a box of chocolates. What if you could have one website that documented virtually every known subject matter and concept, and all its research was bound by the same rules and formatting? Basically, an online encyclopedia. But those already existed. Instead, this would be different. Although this website physically would be centralized, its spirit would be decentralized. Anyone knowledgeable on a given subject could edit these articles themselves, which would then get reviewed by community moderators to make sure that information is accurate. And of course, it was completely free. This new website would be called Wikipedia, which served as an amazing jumping-off point for people looking into a subject for the very first time. However, Wikipedia also acted as an indexer of articles and peer-reviewed sources, which users could go to themselves by scrolling to the bottom of a subject's page. This is often why Wikipedia is not considered a reliable source, because it is not a primary source or even a secondary source, but instead a tertiary source. In other words, it was a compilation of multiple reputable sources on a subject that provided a summary of all those sources at the top. You wouldn't cite an encyclopedia in your English paper. You would cite the sources that the encyclopedia often mentions. Wikipedia is the same way. But now, information online had never been more organized and free to access. You still had leftover practices from the 90s era of the internet, such as instant messaging and public chat rooms with AIM, Yahoo, and MSN Messenger, but big changes were coming, which were only amplified by these major events and technological innovations. With computers getting better and broadband giving users more bandwidth, more cool things could be done with the World Wide Web itself. Just like in the years prior, 3D graphics continue taking over the more static, archaic user interfaces of before. This would become even more commonplace following the releases of macOS X and Windows XP, which were famous for their glossy, textured 3D designs. This would eventually lead to a distinct, iconic style people retrospectively referred to as Frutiger Arrow, as it gave people the opportunity to further create the exact future that they always wanted. But much of that ambition for the future would be stripped away due to very sudden and extremely consequential real-world events. The September 11th attacks didn't just change the internet culturally, but also technologically. When tens of thousands of people began going on the same websites to get their news, it quickly overwhelmed the web servers, often shutting them down entirely for several hours. To work around this, websites quickly had to figure out how to essentially create condensed versions of their websites, which were then hosted across several different decentralized servers, so that the number of online packets being sent drastically decreased, therefore putting less load on the main website. These were called Content Delivery Networks, or CDNs, and were effectively a form of web caching. They had existed before, but September 11th hugely popularized their use as a necessity. You saw something very similar happen with the death of Michael Jackson in 2009, but since that huge load of traffic involved people doing things like writing blogs, tweets, posting YouTube videos, and so on, it was much harder to manage than people who were simply trying to read an article back in 2001. But now, the internet was the main source of news for many people over the television set or even the newspaper. Many of them began following the after effects of this devastating event while connected online in real time. Just months later, another earth-shattering event would occur that was both harmful and strangely beneficial for the internet: the fall of Enron. Now, I think Enron deserves to be its own separate video because it is probably one of the most insane stories in modern history, but in short, Enron had become one of the biggest companies in the world by selling something that was a complete lie. They were primarily in the energy and gas industry, but began expanding into other very sketchy ventures. One of them included broadband internet. Not only was Enron one of those overinflated stock options, their vision was to allow internet bandwidth to be traded like a commodity, like what they had been doing with gas and energy. And they also wanted to provide content delivery networks and even hosting services similar to what we know today as cloud technology. Not too long after they had placed over 15,000 miles in broadband wiring, Enron's entire scheme would surface, and the company would experience a devastating fallout. It went from one of the most powerful companies in the world to nothing virtually overnight. Its dissolution exacerbated the dot-com bubble crash, but it also, weirdly, left behind tons of new, unused broadband infrastructure. You essentially had free real estate in what was at the time state-of-the-art online technology. Naturally, internet service providers and telecom companies left and right began buying these broadband routes for incredibly cheap. So, the fall of Enron was one of many reasons behind why broadband internet became so affordable and commonplace throughout the 2000s. And 2001 was the year where a whole new era in web surfing would begin its first steps. By 2001, people understood that the internet was not just some novelty or fun pastime, but a real-life, practical tool with cultural and historical influence. Its history should be in textbooks. It was time to start documenting as much of it as we possibly could. The nonprofit Internet Archive publicly launches Wayback Machine. Originally starting as just a private research project in 1996, it is a digital archive of website snapshots showing exactly what a page looked like on a certain day in a certain year. Websites change all the time, so naturally, certain data gets lost. But Wayback Machine makes sure that never happens, allowing its old form to be permanently preserved for research and education. By 2001, the internet was a museum, sanctuary, and practical tool all rolled into one, and people had no idea what to expect next. If you would like to learn more about the dot-com bubble, you can check that out right here. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for ad-free videos and exclusive content. Be sure to also check out my second channel, all about the history of the Beatles. I always appreciate a coffee, too. Thank you for watching, everyone.